She spent years keeping her head down, hoping no one would notice the scar that changed everything. Just another shy waitress, blending into the background until one night, a mysterious millionaire reached for her trembling hand, looked into her eyes, and whispered words that shattered her defenses. "You're beautiful, and I'm so sorry." What happened next will challenge everything she thought she knew about worth, love, and second chances. "I'll call someone else to serve you," Mia stammered, her voice just a whisper. "Wait a minute," the man said calmly, looking up at her. His gaze was steady, intense, almost unbelievable. Those eyes, I've sketched those eyes years ago. Mia froze for a moment. The diner's noise, the clinking plates, the hushed conversations, and the soft sizzle from the open kitchen faded into silence. From the open kitchen slowly faded into, she blinked rapidly, unsure whether to run or apologize again. Her fingers gripped the edge of her notebook tighter, her knuckles turning white. The man at table 7, sitting by the window where the morning sun filtered through the dusty curtains, wasn't like the usual customers. He wore a simple but expensive navy blue jacket, and he had an old leather sketchbook next to his black coffee. His face looked familiar, like someone from magazine interviews or art catalogs. But Mia didn't have time for art. She hardly has any time for herself. "I think you've got the wrong person, sir," she said gently, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. "Sorry, I really had to." "I didn't have to," he replied softly but firmly. "You can't forget eyes like that." She turned away without saying another word, quickly walking toward the kitchen door, her long brown hair falling down like a curtain covering the left side of her face. She knew a strand had slipped, feeling a light tug where her hair clip had come loose earlier, but she didn't stop to fix it. Her heart pounded wildly. He couldn't see it. He couldn't know. The diner was a cozy, old-style spot on the edge of a quiet street. Its charm lay in its simplicity. Red leather booths, faded photos of past patrons on the walls, and a jukebox that only played old country tunes. She knew every creaky floorboard, every regular customer who came for coffee but stayed for the comfort. Mia had worked there for nearly 4 years. She knew every creaky floorboard, every face that walked in the front door. She also knew how to make herself invisible. She had perfected the art of moving between tables, eyes down, voice polite but distant. She never lingered too long. If a customer stared at her too closely or asked about her past, she'd find an excuse to switch shifts, clean something in the back, or send one of the other waitresses over. There was a rhythm to it, a safety, a routine. But the man at table 7 broke it with just 2 sentences. In the kitchen, Mia leaned against the counter, trying to catch her breath. "Sarah?" The cook looked up from the grill and raised an eyebrow. "Are you okay, sweetie? You look like you've seen a ghost." Mia shook her head quickly. "No, I just need a second." Sarah didn't say more, flipping the pancakes with the ease of someone who's done it for 20 years. Mia closed her eyes, but all she saw was his image, those eyes. I've sketched them before. That couldn't be true. But deep down, beneath the part of her that had been hiding for years, something stirred, almost like a memory, a faint echo of something lost. Back at table 7, Ethan sat still, his fingers idly tracing the edge of his sketchbook. He'd come to the diner on a whim, driving through the quiet part of town. His eyes caught the neon sign in the window, and something drew him in. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was fate. The trees outside the window. He hadn't meant to say anything. He'd come hoping to disappear for a few hours, sip his coffee in peace, or maybe sketch the trees outside the window. He certainly hadn't expected to find her. Not her exactly, but the girl whose eyes had haunted him for years. He'd sketched those eyes, not from memory, not from life. They came to him in dreams, or perhaps in moments of solitude. Years ago, when he was chasing something real on canvas, the painting was never finished. It sat on the easel in the corner of his studio, covered in dust and shadows until now. Now, sitting across from him in the room was the living image of that dream. But she was more than that. She was fragile, vulnerable, and hidden behind her hair like it was her last wall. Ethan wasn't easily shaken, but instinctively. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Mia didn't go back to the table. Instead, Tom, the other waiter, brought the check. Glancing awkwardly toward the kitchen as he set it down, Ethan didn't touch it. He opened his sketchbook and flipped to a blank page. His pencil moved slowly, curving the hair, the hidden glance, and at the center, those eyes, those eyes. This time, he would finish the sketch. This time, he wouldn't let her disappear. Ethan stood in his studio, silence enveloping him like a fog. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting light on the draped canvases and half-finished paintings. The scent of old oil paint, varnish, and cedar wood hung in the air, a ghost of the life he'd slowly stepped away from. 3 years since he'd last picked up a brush, since he'd truly seen something worth putting on canvas. He moved slowly, almost reverently, toward the back wall. A large painting sat alone, hidden under a linen sheet, untouched by time. He pulled it off with steady hands, revealing the face that had followed him in dreams until today, when it walked into his reality. She was there, not fully formed, not clear, just the outline of her face and the full depth of her eyes. The rest faded into blurry strokes, muted colors, and uncertain lines. But the eyes were unmistakable, wide, sad, deep, alive. Mia, he breathed out, almost a laugh, almost in disbelief. You're real, he whispered to the empty room. Visitors. Collectors visiting. Now it's the studio used to be bustling. Assistants coming and going. Critics visiting. Collectors visiting. Now it felt like a museum, preserved in stillness. There was a soft knock at the open door behind him. Ethan. It's Julian, his longtime assistant, friend, and closest thing to family. You're here early. Ethan didn't turn around. Do you remember this one? Julian stepped closer and looked at the painting, his eyebrows raising slightly. The ghost girl. Yes. How could I forget you were obsessed with those eyes for months and then suddenly gave up midway? I didn't give up. I just couldn't go on, Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on the painting. I thought she wasn't real. I thought I'd made her up. Julian crossed his arms. And yesterday, I met her at a diner on Willow Street. She served me coffee and tried to avoid me like the plague. But it was her, Julian. I'd bet everything on it. Those eyes, he said, his voice trailing off. They weren't just a vision. They were hers. Julian didn't respond right away. After a moment, he said, So, what's next? Are you going to try painting her again after all this time? Ethan slowly sat on the stool nearby. I haven't painted anything in 3 years. Not really. My last 10 exhibits were just recycled old work or minor tweaks, and they still sold because, well, my name means something, but I didn't feel anything. Julian nodded slowly. He'd witnessed the decline, knew the fire had gone out, but never dared to say it. Until yesterday, Ethan continued, when she walked up to my table, trembling, hiding behind her hair. I felt the need to capture something real again. Not for galleries, not for buyers, but for me. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I don't know her name. I don't know her story, but I know whatever it is. It's alive in those eyes. And if I never paint another thing in my life, I want to finish this one. Julian watched him carefully. So, what's your plan? Just show up again and stare at her until she runs off? Ethan smiled. Not exactly. But I'll go back. Not for the coffee. Not for nostalgia, but for her. And if she doesn't want to talk, I'll respect that. But I have to try, because if I let go again, I might never pick up a brush again. He looked back at the painting, at the eyes that felt like fiction, and now felt like fate. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the slightest tremor in his fingers, the ache to create, to finish, to understand. He gently covered the painting, but his expression wasn't dark anymore. Now it was clear. With purpose, with inspiration. Tomorrow he'd return to the diner, and this time, he wouldn't let her slip away. The bell on the diner's door jingled softly as Ethan walked in just after lunch hour. This time, the place was quieter, with just a few scattered customers hunched over their plates and half-full coffee cups. The familiar smell of grilled bacon and fresh coffee lingered in the air. He chose the same table by the window, where the afternoon light poured in with a gentle warmth. This time, He brought nothing but himself. Behind the counter, Mia hesitated when she saw him. She'd hoped, foolishly, that he wouldn't come back. Her chest tightened, but her feet kept moving. It was part of her job, and she'd long accepted that swallowing fear was like having a second cup of coffee. She approached cautiously, notebook in hand, hair carefully swept to the left as always. "Hello again," Ethan said, his voice calm and kind. Mia nodded slightly, not meeting his eyes. "Can I get you something like last time? Black coffee." He paused. "Unless you'd like to try something different." She almost smiled but caught herself. "The blueberry muffins are good today." "Then I'll go with that." He replied, "It's a deal." She jotted down the order and turned away. "That wasn't my intention." Mia stopped. His voice was so calm, so sincere. It surprised her. She nodded politely, but still didn't look directly at him. "It's okay. I'm used to it." Ethan frowned slightly, but said nothing more. A few minutes later, she returned with his order, setting it down carefully. "There you go," she said softly. He looked at her, searching her face, trying to find the courage to say more. But then, something unexpected happened. A strong gust of wind blew through the open window next to their table, rustling the napkins and packets of sugar in the holder. It caught Mia off guard. Her hair lifted with the sudden breeze, just enough to reveal what she'd hidden so carefully. A faint scar stretched from her left temple down her cheek, curving just below her cheekbone. It wasn't grotesque, but rough. A story etched into her skin, and it was real. Everything in the diner seemed to stop. Mia's hand flew to her face. Too late. She knew it was exposed. Strangers had seen it. A whisper spread from a table behind them. Someone murmured too loudly. Her breath caught in her throat. But before she could turn and flee, Ethan stood up. His movement was slow, deliberate. He stepped toward her, not hesitantly, but present. He reached out, not to touch the scar, but to gently tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. He did it carefully, not to hide her, but simply to see her. "You don't have to hide," he said, his voice even and warm. "That's a beauty not everyone has. It's the kind you deserve to own." Mia's eyes widened, a mix of shock and doubt flashing in them. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The whispers in the diner stopped. People looked, but they didn't stare. They saw something shift, something unspoken. Some turned away out of respect. She knew a strand had shifted, feeling a light tug where her hair clip had come loose earlier, but she didn't stop to fix it. The others watched quietly, as if afraid to breathe and break the moment. Ethan stepped back, giving her space. "But I meant every word." Mia stood still for another second, then nodded slightly, her fingers still touching her cheek, as if confirming the scar was still there, but somehow felt less noticeable. She turned and headed back to the kitchen, her heart racing and her breaths shallow. But for the first time, she didn't want to run. She didn't feel ashamed, just something unfamiliar quietly rising in her chest. Hope. The next morning, the diner was quieter than usual. A light drizzle blurred the view outside the window, painting the world in grays and soft reflections. Mia moved between the tables with her usual quiet rhythm, her hair pulled back loosely but still guarding the left side of her face. She hadn't expected to see him again, not after yesterday, but a part of her had been quietly waiting, listening for the bell on the door, glancing toward the window seat. Right at 10:17 a.m., the bell rang. Ethan walked in without hesitation, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. His expression was gentle, determined. He sat at the same table without looking around. He waited. Mia approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She didn't speak, just placed a menu in front of him. "I'm not here to eat," Ethan said gently. "I brought something for you." She blinked, confused. He slowly, deliberately, unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a large sketchbook. The pages were slightly worn at the edges, thick and textured. Unwrapped the brown paper and revealed he opened it and turned toward her. There, in delicate pencil strokes, was a face. Her face, or rather, the beginnings of it, the soft lines of her hair, the curve of her lips, but most alive were those eyes, the sad eyes she saw in the mirror every morning. It was her, sketched years before he met her. Mia gasped, stepping back slightly. "What is this?" she whispered. Ethan held out the sketchbook, placing it gently on the table between them. I started this years ago. I didn't know who she was. I just couldn't forget her. I never finished it. Couldn't. Something was missing until I met you. Mia stared at the image, her chest tightening. Her instinct was to run, to deny it. But those eyes, they were hers. Undeniable, not just in shape, but in the pain they carried. Hesitation, guarded hope. She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. Why did you sketch me? You didn't even know me. I don't know, he admitted, but somehow I felt you. And now I know it's not just a face. It's a story. Your story. Mia stepped back again, as if the table itself had become too intimate. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Her hands trembled slightly. I need a minute, she said, turning away quickly. She hurried to the back of the diner, pushed through the restroom door, and locked it behind her. Her reflection stared back in the mirror, eyes wide, breaths short, lips parted in shock. Why her? Why now? What fate brought a man to see her before he even knew her? She leaned over the sink, trying to steady herself, but her heart wouldn't slow. Outside the diner, Ethan waited. He didn't follow. He didn't look around for her. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. He placed it next to the sketchbook, folded neatly, then stood to leave. It was raining as he stepped outside. He paused once, glancing back at the window where he'd been sitting. Then he disappeared into the gray morning. A few minutes later, Mia returned. The booth was empty, but on the table sat the sketchbook, and beside it, the note. If you ever feel alone, come find me. My gallery is at 14 Brooks Street. I believe we can finish this together. Not just the painting. She stared at the words for a long time, her fingers brushing the sketch again. It wasn't just art, it was recognition. And maybe, just maybe, an invitation to something greater. The gallery was quiet that Thursday afternoon, the kind of silence that only comes when no one is around to disturb it. Soft light filtered through the high windows, illuminating the white walls where paintings stood like silent witnesses to their creators' pasts. Ethan had just arranged a new piece near the corner when the door creaked open. He turned, not expecting a visitor at this late hour. It was her. Mia stood just inside the entrance, soaked from the rain, her coat clinging to her, hair pulled back but still falling forward like a veil. Her eyes, those unmistakable eyes, met his for a moment before looking away. He said nothing, just slowly stepped forward and handed her a clean towel from the reception desk. Thank you, she whispered, taking it with trembling hands. He didn't ask why she was there. He didn't need to. He simply stepped aside and gestured toward the small seating area at the back of the gallery. She followed him, each step hesitant, as if unsure if the floor beneath her was solid enough. They sat facing each other in silence. The gallery lights hummed softly above. Outside, the rain continued its steady patter on the windows. After a while, Mia finally spoke. I wasn't going to come. I told myself 100 reasons not to, but your note wouldn't leave me alone. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm glad you did. She looked at her hands. I thought if I ignored it, the pain would go away. But it didn't. You saw something in me that I've tried to bury for years, and you put it on paper. He stayed still, letting her speak at her own pace, not pushing, not prodding. Finally, she said, I used to dance. Ballet since I was 5. It was everything. I dreamed of stages, lights, movement. It was the only time I felt seen. She paused, her throat tightening. One night when I was 15, our house caught fire. They said it was faulty wiring. My parents tried to get me out, but I passed out in my room. A neighbor pulled me out unconscious. She lightly traced the path of it in the air without touching her face. That's when this happened. My dad couldn't look at me the same. My mom tried to pretend nothing changed, but everything did. Ethan's hands clenched slightly on his lap. She noticed and softened her tone. I stopped dancing. Kids at school stared and whispered. People said it wasn't that bad, that it would fade. But it didn't, and the way they looked at me didn't either. Her voice faded to a whisper. I started hiding behind my hair, behind silence. I moved away as soon as I could. I got the job at the diner because they didn't ask questions. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes filled with something deeper than sadness, resignation, exhaustion, but also hope. And then you sat at my table. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze never wavering. When I look at you, I see the fire you walked through. Mia blinked quickly, eyes stinging. You didn't flinch when you saw it. That's rare, he said gently. It's not something to fear. It's your story, and it deserves to be seen. That's rare, he said gently. It's not something to fear. It's your story, and it deserves to be seen. Silence fell again, but now it was lighter, more familiar. Then, Ethan reached behind his chair and pulled out the unfinished painting, the one he'd hidden for years. I want to finish this with you, if you'll let me. Mia hesitated, then slowly stood and walked to the easel. She looked down at the face, her expression a mix of reverence and vulnerability. She reached out and traced the outline of the eyes with a fingertip. A tear fell before she could stop it. Okay, she whispered. Ethan looked up. Will you sit for me? She nodded. Yes, but only if you promise not to hide the scar. He stood and stepped closer to her. I never intended to. For the first time, she smiled without holding back. And somewhere in that quiet room, surrounded by shadows and light, two broken pieces began to find their way to wholeness. The studio had changed in ways neither expected. What was once a place of solitude became a quiet space of connection. Mia arrived at 10 every day, her steps initially slow, her voice still soft. Ethan greeted her with a gentle nod, always calm, never rushed. She sat on the stool in the middle of the room, surrounded by drop cloths, natural light pouring in from the high windows. At first, her shoulders were tense, her gaze hesitant, but Ethan never asked her to pose a certain way. He let her be, let her breathe, and over time, she relaxed. Ethan never mentioned the scar. He never asked how it felt or about the pain. But what impressed Mia most was that he never looked away from it. He looked at her with absolute respect, and when he glanced elsewhere, he never avoided the line on her cheek. He saw it. But more than that, he saw her. Each session was a study in trust. Ethan painted her not just with strokes, but with reverence. He captured the light dancing on her skin in the late afternoon, the slight tug at her lips when she was thinking, the way her eyes softened when she forgot she was being watched. There was still something in the painting he didn't quite understand. Every night, Ethan stared at it and felt a pull of incompletion. The form was there, the emotion was there, but the soul wasn't. It needed something subtle yet undeniable. One morning, he met her at the door with a soft smile and no brush in hand. Come with me, he said. She followed him to the back of the studio, where a small garden bloomed beyond a wooden gate. The garden was modest, a bit wild, with tall stems swaying in the breeze and flowers blooming without any particular order. He knelt by a cluster of purple daisies and gently picked one. Then he turned to her and stepped closer, her breath catching as he tucked the flower into her hair just above her left ear. Right by the scar, he said, his voice almost a whisper, that this flower grew in the harshest soil, where most things gave up. It bloomed. It's beautiful not because of where it grows, but because it does. It reminds me of you. She blinked, trying to steady her heart. Ethan added, and now it's part of you. That afternoon, as Ethan sat once more under the soft golden light of the studio, he finally saw what the painting needed. He returned to his canvas with a near-sacred reverence. This time, he didn't avoid the scar. He defined it. He shaped it carefully, without harshness. He gave it texture, presence, a story, and beside it, in her hair pulled back from her face, he painted a small purple flower. It sat lightly, like a quiet crown, a statement not of perfection, but of resilience. When Mia saw the nearly finished portrait a few days later, she stood silent for a long time. Her hand slowly rose, fingertips trembling as they hovered just above the canvas. She was there, truly her, not the version she'd tried to hide, not the edited reflection she'd practiced in mirrors. This was her truth, her scar, her eyes, her soul. Yes, she began, but the words caught in her throat. Ethan stood beside her, saying nothing. Finally, she whispered, "That's me." He handed her a glass of water, their fingers brushing. She looked down, startled by the sudden warmth, but his hand didn't pull away. Instead, it gently held hers, grounding her. He said softly, "I've never painted anyone like you. You're the most beautifully imperfect soul I've ever known." She looked up at him and, for the first time, didn't look away. Her smile spread slowly, hesitantly, but genuine. No veil, no shame, just Mia. And for Ethan, it was the most complete portrait he'd ever seen. The invitation was simple. A white card, gold lettering, no frills, just the title in elegant script at the top. Beauty Unfinished. Below was the date, time, and Ethan's gallery address. Mia stared at it for a long time. "This should be your night," she'd told Ethan when he first mentioned it. "Your work, your story." But Ethan just smiled gently and replied, "It's our story. And that painting isn't mine. It's yours." I just held the brush. At first, she resisted. The thought of standing in front of strangers, letting them see her unhidden scar, unedited, terrified her. But Ethan's quiet, steady voice stayed with her. "You're not hiding anymore. Mia, you're showing the world what real beauty looks like." And so, she agreed. The gallery was alive that evening. Warm lights bathed the white walls in gold. Glasses of champagne clinked softly. Jazz music played in the background, and guests whispered in admiration as they moved between the paintings. Most were new works. Ethan's return to form was nothing short of miraculous. Each piece was raw, emotional, profound, but none drew more attention than the one in the center. A spotlight fell on it. It was Mia's portrait. It wasn't flashy or polished. Her eyes looked straight ahead, unflinching, with a soft but real smile. The scar marked her cheek in all its truth, and nestled in her hair beside it was the painted purple daisy. People didn't say much in front of it. They stood, they stared. Some turned away with tears in their eyes. Others kept coming back to it, drawn by something they couldn't name. At first, Mia stood quietly in the back, uncertain, wrapped in a soft navy dress with her hair loosely pinned, no longer hiding. Her scar was visible, and for once, it wasn't the first thing on her mind. Ethan came over to her. "Are you okay?" he whispered. She took a shaky breath, then nodded. "I think so." He gently touched her hand. "You're not alone." Not long after, a small voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you the woman in the painting?" Mia turned. A little girl, no older than 10, stood there holding her mother's hand. The girl's face had a visible burn scar on one side, faded but present. Mia knelt down to her level, her heart pounding. "Yes, that's me." The girl looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and hugged her. Mia held her breath. The girl whispered, "I have a scar too. I always hide it, but you make me feel beautiful." Mia closed her eyes, her arms tightening around the child. Her throat burned, her eyes stung. When they pulled apart, the girl's mother mouthed, "Thank you," before they walked away. Ethan was at her side again, slipping his hand into hers, holding her as the emotions rose. Mia wiped her eyes and looked back at the painting once more. The girl had seen something in her that she'd never dared see in herself, and in that moment, something became clear. Ethan leaned in closer, his voice low, his warm breath on her ear. "Do you see it now?" he whispered. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever created." She turned to him, a tear rolling down her cheek where the scar still lay. He lifted a hand and gently brushed her hair back behind her ear. Then, with infinite tenderness, he kissed the scar at her temple. It wasn't a kiss of pity. It was reverence. Mia smiled through her tears. "You really see me, don't you?" "I've always seen you," he said. They stood there hand in hand under the soft lights and the silent eyes of the paintings. And for the first time in her life, Mia didn't feel unfinished. She felt whole. The bell on the diner's door rang one last time as Mia walked out, her apron neatly folded over her arm. She'd quit with a quiet smile, hugged Sarah goodbye, and even exchanged a few kind words with Tom. No fanfare, no dramatic exit, just a silent shedding of a chapter that no longer defined her. Outside, The sun bathed the street in a golden late-morning glow. Her hair was pulled into a high ponytail, swaying in the breeze. For the first time in years, the left side of her face, scar and all, felt the sun's warmth, and she didn't flinch. Her steps were steady, each one forward, light, confident. It had been 2 weeks since the exhibit, since she'd stood under her own portrait and watched strangers look at her without judgment, some even with admiration, as the little girl with the burn had whispered words that would live in Mia's heart forever. "You make me feel beautiful." Mia never went back to hiding. She and Ethan never made a big announcement. They didn't post pictures or declare it, but everyone in their circle knew. The way he watched her in the room, the way she smiled brighter when he was near, the way they quietly held hands while working side by side. Their love wasn't loud. It was real. Mia joined Ethan at the gallery soon after, not just as his muse, but as his partner. High ponytail, swaying in the breeze. They launched a project called Canvas of Courage, a community program for burn survivors, amputees, and those with visible differences to share their stories through art. Mia helped them paint, helped them speak, helped them stand before others with their scars uncovered and hearts open. She no longer avoided mirrors. She embraced them. She no longer pulled her hair down to cover her face. She let it flow. And on that bright morning, as she crossed the street toward the gallery, a boy sitting on a park bench caught her eye. The boy looked up from his coloring book, his small arm bandaged, his face curious. Mia smiled at him, wide and full of life. The boy hesitated, then smiled back. The way he watched her in the room, her in the room, the way she smiled brighter, the way she smiled brighter when he was near, the way they quietly held hands while working side by side. Their love wasn't loud, it was real. Mia joined Ethan at the gallery soon after, not just as his muse, but as his partner. They launched a project called Canvas of Courage, a community program for burn survivors, amputees, and those with visible differences to share their stories through art. Mia helped them paint, helped them speak, helped them stand before others with their scars uncovered and hearts open. She no longer avoided mirrors. She embraced them. She no longer pulled her hair down to cover her face. She let it flow. And on that bright morning, as she crossed the street toward the gallery, a boy sitting on a park bench caught her eye. The boy looked up from his coloring book, his small arm bandaged, his face curious. Mia smiled at him, wide and full of life. The boy hesitated, then smiled back. It was a small thing, but for Mia, it meant everything. She kept walking, her heart full, her chin high, her past no longer something she needed to bury. The world hadn't changed, but she had, and in the quiet of that realization, she finally understood what Ethan had whispered in the gallery as the lights dimmed and only they remained. "You were never unfinished," he'd said. "You were just waiting to be seen." And now she was. Through this heartfelt story, we're reminded that true connection often begins in the most unexpected moments when someone takes the time to see beyond the surface. What started as an ordinary encounter slowly unraveled years of pain, misunderstanding, and longing, ultimately revealing a truth both fragile and deeply human. Healing doesn't always come from grand gestures, but from quiet presence, gentle patience, and the courage to stay. If this story moved you, consider standing behind our main character. They've taken a brave step toward vulnerability, and perhaps what they need most now is to trust that kindness will meet them halfway. What would you do in their shoes, and what can each of us do to be that presence for someone else? If you believe in stories that stir the soul and restore faith in humanity, help us continue sharing them. Subscribe to Touching Tales Hub and be part of a community that believes every act of care, no matter how small, has the power to change a life. Let's walk with these characters, support them, and maybe learn something about our own journey along the way.